Well, good afternoon, and Mara, thank you for that very kind introduction of me, but I think also of Vital Voices. That was very nice, very well done. I'm thrilled to be back in Arkansas for a number of reasons, one of which I feel as though the roots of Vital Voices are right here. Two of our founders, of course, have very strong roots here, Donna McClarty and of course, Hillary Clinton. So it's wonderful to be back, and it's also wonderful to be here at the Clinton School, a school that understands that serving as a public leader is indeed all about service, and that being quite core to the mission of Vital Voices as well. You know, we are not just standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, but at Vital Voices we also understand that we have to pass the torch to the next generation. And so I hope with my presence we can inspire others to come and join us on this journey. So what I wanted to do over the next 15 or 20 minutes, then I hope to take questions from all of you, is to really take you on a journey around the world. You know, you think about this moment. We have leaders just a few blocks from here, from all over the world, meeting to talk about the state of the world's women. And they're not just talking about it because it's the nice thing to do or the right thing to do, because women are 51% of the population. They're coming together because they recognize it's smart, and quite frankly, it's the only thing to do if we're going to move forward and build a stronger, interconnected, and global world. So about 5 years ago, there was a headline in The Economist magazine that really caught my attention. It said, "Forget China, forget India, forget the internet. It will be women that will drive economic growth and opportunity in the next century." Well, this sentiment is certainly what Vital Voices was founded on 15 years ago. We were founded on a very simple idea by Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright that no country could expect to move forward if half the population was left behind. You think about it, it's just simple math. If you exclude half the population, the women and girls of your country, you don't provide them with education, opportunities to start and grow businesses, with the ability to move freely and safely in their communities and their homes, how can you possibly ever tap their full potential? In many ways, we've come a long way in 15 years. But I have to say, in the many countries that I've traveled to, if you scratch just beneath the surface, you see that there is still very much a long way to go to tap women's full potential. Yes, economists do believe that women are indeed the emerging market. They are the great growth reserve, one of the greatest untapped potential. But at the same time, we know that in many countries around the world, 600 million women today live in countries where domestic violence is not a crime. And in many more countries, even though there might be a law in the books, we know that those laws go unimplemented, unenforced, and not taken seriously. We also know, and I know it'll be a topic at the Club of Madrid meetings over the next few days, that women represent just 19% of seats in parliaments around the world. But I would actually argue that although we might have 19% of seats in parliament, I don't know that we actually hold 19% of decision-making power. You know, Vital Voices was founded on this idea that if we could just get women's voices to the table, we could make things 50% better. Right? I mean, if half the population's not at the decision-making table, if we could empower them, if we could mentor them, if we could train them, if we could get their voices to the table, we could make the world 50% better. We were wrong, because actually, a number like 50% is way too small. What we found is that when women get to the table, they bring something different. Not only do they bring something different, they turn around and look at who's not at the table. They know what it feels like not to have their voices heard, not to be taken seriously, and they turn around and they bring others along. We've discovered that women are not just a number to be tapped. They are not just this great economic force, they're actually a leadership force. Women are a different kind of number, and when they lead, they bring different skills and abilities to the table. I believe that this difference is actually precisely what our world needs today. If you look around the world, from Egypt to the United States, you see people trying to get connected to each other, but at the same time feeling disconnected from their leaders. You see people crying out because they feel as though they're not being heard. They feel as though there is a strong divide between the haves and the have-nots and growing disparities. You see countries trying to recover from economic crisis, and you realize the status quo leadership has to change. And what we've seen is that women lead in a more inclusive, collaborative, and cause-driven way. They practice a more sustainable model of leadership, a model where they understand that power expands, actually, the moment that it's shared. So a few years ago, we really began to look at this difference in the way that women lead and begin to ask questions. And we began to look at the 50 top women leaders that we'd empowered of those 12,000 that Mara mentioned. And we began to realize that they led in a very interesting way, very different from their male colleagues, but at the same time, there were commonalities across different cultures and religions and socioeconomic backgrounds and borders and even generations. There were these 5 distinct commonalities in the way that women led change. And we began to ask, if we began to call those principles, those ideas, these methods that women led change out, and we began to spread those ideas, how would the world change? How would leadership of all people, men and women, change? And the book that I've just written, that I think you're going to have the opportunity to purchase, and I'd be happy to sign, really tells that story and shares this new model of leadership that Vital Voices has learned from women around the world, 12,000 women in 144 countries. And what I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about that model that we believe is not just a model for women. It's a model we've learned from women, but we believe it's actually going to change the way that people think about and practice leadership. So the first principle is really about the idea that true leaders have a driving force or a sense of mission. That leadership begins with oneself and their motivation to step forward. So many of the women that we've worked with, I'll ask them, why did you step forward? You took huge risk by calling out human traffickers and setting up this shelter to rehabilitate 8,000 women and children from human trafficking and reintegrate them into the economy and into society. Why did you do that? And they won't say, well, I stepped up because I wanted a title or position. They'll say, I stepped up because I wanted to right a wrong. I wanted to make change. And they feel so deeply committed to that cause or that conviction that they stay the course. Most recently, I had the opportunity to meet Aung San Suu Kyi, who many of you, of course, know and has been in the press quite a bit lately as Burma goes through incredible change. She was under house arrest for 15 of the last 23 years. And when I met her, I felt as though she really embodied this first principle of having a driving force or sense of mission. You know, she told me that she believed the difference between good intentions and great leadership was the courage and commitment to stay the course, no matter how difficult the path. And I think that so often in this world of impatience and so many opportunities around us, we tend to shift from one opportunity to the next. But I think that true leaders that stay the course, driven by that mission, by that driving force, are truly those who make sustainable change happen. The second principle of our leadership model and what we've learned from women around the world is that true leaders have strong roots in their community and constituencies. How can one lead if you can't be empathetic? If you can't understand the impact of your leadership on those people who are going to be following you, how can you honestly expect to be a strong leader? I think this really was exemplified most recently by a woman that I worked with, Vital Voices worked with in Egypt. Her name is Buthena Camel. Do you know that she was the only candidate for president in Egypt who traveled all over the country on a listening tour? Sounds kind of familiar to someone else who ran for Senate a number of years ago. She went on a listening tour to really understand what the people would want from their leader. She knew that in Egypt, that by the way currently only has 2% of women in their parliament, she knew that in Egypt, men and women stood shoulder to shoulder in the square. Citizens from all different walks of life stood and demanded change. She wanted to make sure that when change came, that change would represent the views and ideas of the people. To me, that's true leadership. Now, she didn't get elected, but Vital Voices is supporting her so that one day, maybe she will. The third principle of our leadership model is crossing lines that typically divide. So what we believe is that women in particular have this innate ability and desire to want to connect across differences. We've seen it in so many countries around the world. For example, in Northern Ireland, many of you may be aware that in 1976, two women, a Protestant and a Catholic, crossed the sectarian line that divided their community. Two women who had basically had enough. They decided that they didn't want their husbands, their sons, their brothers dying in a bloody civil war anymore. So they crossed that line and they began to build an infrastructure to support a peace accord, a peace agreement that might one day come from their leaders. They began to have their children play together. They began to fight for integrated schools. They began to create a community of not peace yet, but coexistence. In 1976, those two women, Mary Corrigan Maguire and Betty Williams, won the Nobel Peace Prize. Fast forward 22 years. 1998, thanks to the great leadership and support of leaders around the world, including Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, leaders sat down at the peace negotiation tables to develop the Good Friday Peace Accord. So this is 15 years ago. Leaders sat down. There was not one woman there. Not one woman sitting at that peace negotiation table. Two women, a Protestant and a Catholic, once again said, we think that's wrong. We think that women's voices need to be heard. So they decided they would create their own party. But their party would not be just Protestants or just Catholics or just Unionists or just nationalists. Their party would be across all political sectors. But it would be the desires and the vision of women in Northern Ireland. And those two women, Pearl Sager and Monica McWilliams, did get a place at that peace negotiation table and did work to implement the peace. We believe so strongly that, of course, you've got to bring others along if you want to make change, but the only way to make sustainable change is to bring people along with you who don't always agree with everything that you believe. It is the only way to truly make sustainable change as a leader. The fourth area of our leadership model is the idea that true change only comes about from bold ideas followed by bold actions. And one of the things that we find, and women will often say to us, is that they think outside the box. They have new and innovative ideas because, quite frankly, they've never been inside the box. They don't know what the box looks like. And so they come up with these crazy ideas. And when you think about it, the most genius people in our world were once considered crazy. And quite frankly, so much of Vital Voices' work is finding those crazy innovative ideas, those crazy innovative leaders, and investing in them before anyone else does. Being that early investor to give them the visibility, credibility, and skills that they need to really take that vision to scale. One of the women who I think speaks to this model is a young woman in Brazil. I was just actually down in Brazil meeting with her, and she's a graffiti artist. She herself was a victim of domestic violence, and she was able to escape that violent relationship. And she learned about a law in her country called the Maria de Pena law, which says that those who are perpetrators of domestic violence will go to prison if convicted. And she knew that in the favelas of Rio, the slum areas of Rio, most people didn't know about this law. And she thought, how could she communicate a law, this legal jargon, to a community where many people are illiterate? And she realized she could use her graffiti. She could use her art. So her graffiti is not like tagging that we would see in the United States as our graffiti. I mean, it's actually beautiful art. It's murals in their community. And so she began to paint these beautiful murals to communicate to those people living in the favelas and the slum areas of Rio and throughout the country this law of domestic violence. So 2 weeks ago, when I traveled down to Brazil, I took Panmela Castro, the young graffiti artist, who now is named one of the top graffiti artists in her country, who has been lauded around the globe to meet with Maria de Pena, the woman who was shot by her husband and is actually paralyzed, being a victim of domestic violence, but we actually had them meet for the very first time. And Penmela turned to me and she said, before I met Vital Voices, I was just a crazy girl who did art. And now I'm seen as a leader. And I think that for so many people who are pushing the envelope, who are stepping up, motivated by wanting to make change, they are seen as sometimes crazy until they're recognized as a leader. And I think it's not just about other people recognizing them. I think for Penmela, it was about she recognizing herself as a leader and recognizing that leadership is an opportunity to spread her message, but it's also a huge responsibility to make change. And she now has a following of hundreds of girls who come and do her graffiti art with her, and she's really created sort of a movement in Brazil. So bold ideas and bold actions. The fifth area and last principle of our leadership model is just the idea that true leaders have to have a resolve to pay it forward. They have to understand that power expands the very moment it's shared. You think about countries around the world that are economic and social powerhouses that are growing and people are thriving. They have leaders who understand that they have to share power and resources and empower people. Then there are countries like, let's take Cameroon, for example, a country that is very resource wealthy, but most of the people live below the poverty line because a very small number of leaders at the top are holding power very tightly to just a few, not understanding the idea that power expands the moment it's shared. And slowly, ever so slowly, and speeding up over time, their economy is shrinking. They're crippling their country because they don't understand this fundamental idea of leadership. And one of the women that Vital Voices supports, a woman named Kawala, is running for president in Cameroon. She ran for president, she lost, she's running again. Because power has only passed once in 50 years of that country's history as its own independent nation. I want to tell you one last story of a woman who inspires me, and she was one of the inspirations to write this book, because to me, she really exemplifies this idea of a resolve to pay it forward, and truly what leadership is about. And I think she reminded me what Vital Voices is about. Ultimately, what we're doing is we're searching the world for crazy, untapped, explosive potential women leaders. And we're investing in them so that they can take their dreams to scale. But they aren't just dreams for themselves, they're dreams for their entire country, sometimes even our world. So this last story is about a young woman named Kekenya Ntaya. She's from Kenya, and she grew up in a Maasai village. And in her village, girls at age 7 are taken out of school, they undergo the practice of female genital mutilation, and then they're promised to be married. And she looked at her teachers and she looked at her mother and she realized, I would like to one day be a teacher. I don't want to end up like my mother. I don't want, at age 7, the rest of my life to be told to me. I want to create my own path. And so she decided that the only negotiation tool that she had was the fact that she had to undergo this culturally harmful practice of female genital mutilation. And she went to her father and she said, I will go through that practice, but only if you let me stay in school. And so he agreed, because it would be a great shame to the family if she didn't undergo that practice. At the end of high school, she had a much bolder vision. She now wanted to go to college, and she had somehow, I don't know how, I've been to her village, there is no internet, but somehow she got a scholarship to a university in the United States, in Pittsburgh. And she decided that she was going to go, but she would need the community's support, blessing, and she would need them to help her to purchase a plane ticket. And her father had now passed away at this point, and so she actually traveled throughout the village and talked to the village elders. She came to them before sunrise because there is a belief in the Maasai village that Any news brought before sunrise must be good news. And she asked them if she could indeed, get their blessing and potentially their financial support to go to college. They agreed. And she flew off on a plane. Her mother was the only one who came to see her off because it wasn't a great blessing in their community that she was going off to college. People just sort of looked the other way. I met her in 2006, and she told me that she had a debt to repay. She told me her story about how she had left Kenya, how she'd gotten an education, and she told me that she was just a dissertation away from her PhD in education. And she told me about a bold dream she had to go back to her village and to build the first school for girls, to keep girls in school, and ultimately to change culture, to change the way that people valued and saw girls in her community. She had seen this powerful example in the United States, and she wanted to figure out how to slowly replicate that in her community. And Vital Voices invested in her. We mentored her, we trained her, we connected her to a network of her peers, and then we traveled back with her to Kenya. And I remember on that trip, I decided I have to bring a really high-level delegation of women leaders, from the business sector and from politics. It has to be this, we're gonna, go in force. And we were driving, we came by plane and then by little plane and then jeeps to finally get out to the Masai Mara where her village is. And we're coming along the road, and I see all these people on bikes and mopeds and walking with chairs on their backs. I was thinking, where are all these people? Where are these people going with chairs? And when I got there, I realized they were bringing the chairs for us, because it was such an honor that all of these people had come from all over the world, from Africa, from the United States, to the groundbreaking of Kenya's school for girls. And they wanted us to have a place to sit. And we got there, and I realized the moment I got there we had success, because every single man in that village came up to me and told me he was somehow related to Kenya. He was her brother. Anyway, I realized, okay, change has taken place. I also realized it didn't matter that I brought this very high-level delegation of the most powerful women on the Fortune 500 list. We showed up. That's what mattered. What mattered was the world was watching that day as Kenya broke ground on that school. The world was watching and praising a daughter of their village for building the first ever school for girls. Now, the girls who have gone through that school have even bolder vision. And today, there's actually 120 girls who are enrolled in Kenya's Center for Excellence. These are girls who, some of them orphans, but all of them not promised off to be married at age 7 and not undergone the practice of FGM. Culture change has happened. The school is also heavily supported by a group of elders, most of them men, and they're looking at how they might take the model of Kenya's Center for Excellence to other schools around the world. So you think about that. She's a woman who was invested in by her community, by Vital Voices, and who knew that leadership's an opportunity, but it's a responsibility, and I have to give back. And ultimately, that's what we're doing at Vital Voices. We're sort of finding those bold dreamers, and we're investing in them and their bold visions for a different kind of world. And I think one of the greatest lessons that I have learned from all these women over the last 15 years is that you can't wait for an invitation to lead change. There is no final destination in leadership. Leadership is not about title, position, how many people report to you. It is about the actions that you take, decisions that you make, the way that you serve the people of your community, the people of your company, the people of your country on a daily basis. I think I've also learned, and I particularly want to sort of shout this in that area of the room because I know that many of the students have joined us, is that you can't be afraid to make mistakes. One of the fascinating things in writing this book and interviewing so many of the women who I so admired and put on pedestals for years is I realized how many mistakes they made, but how they embraced those mistakes. And how they really understood that failure was not the opposite of success, it was actually a stepping stone to it. So I think that taking those risks, as I did when I was 21. I think she said I was 15. I was like, well, often I joke I was 12, but actually taking those risks at a young age are really important. I think once you take those risks at a young age, you're more likely to take them in the future. So anyway, I'm thrilled to be here, particularly as world leaders gather to look at how to move the state of the world's women forward. And I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I heard you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Not yet.
Is it on? Try this one.
Thank you. Ms. Nelson, thank you so much for being here. I'm a first-year Clinton student, and when I found out about the school, I was reading up on Hillary Clinton, and I found Vital Voices, and I was in tears. I was so excited to learn about your work. And as you were speaking, I'm from New Orleans, and I'm now an Arkansas transplant, and I know some amazing women with bold ideas who are striving to do bold actions, but don't have an organization like Vital Voices to elevate their work. In addition, I have a room of classmates here who I see their amazing work. So I want to know, can women in the United States be a part of Vital Voices, and how so, and what other organizations could we go to ask for support for these women that we know that are here at the table with us?
Sure, thank you. So Vital Voices was really set up to work with women in emerging democracies, countries in transition. So primarily we're serving developed, not actually host women leaders. 2 times a year they hold symposiums throughout the state. They travel around the state to do a number of events to support and raise funding and awareness for women leaders that we work with from Afghanistan to Guatemala, around the world. So that's one opportunity, is maybe to start a council here in Arkansas. It obviously takes a group of committed women here who would want to sort of take the ideas and seeds of Vital Voices and build something locally to support our work around the world. But I think one of the things that the women in Connecticut have found is that they gain so much from it, from working with those women. The other thing that we've just started, and this is really more for young women in high school, is one of my debts to pay back is to help young women to find their passion and to understand that leadership isn't this final destination. It is about the actions that we take on a daily basis. And to teach them new models and ideas of leadership from women around the world, the way that I have learned. And so we started a partnership with Ann Inc., which is the parent company of Ann Taylor and Loft stores, which I'm sure you're familiar with. They have a deep interest in girls' empowerment in the United States. So we joined forces, and each year we have a competitive application process. It's on our website. It's called the Ann Power Program, and girls can apply. We take juniors and seniors in high school, and they submit an application, and they come for a week-long training, but they're not trained by women like me. They're trained by women around the world who have taught me what leadership's about. So they learn those leadership skills, and then they're encouraged to go back and sort of launch their Pay It Forward projects in their communities. And we've seen just astounding things that they've been able to do, both in their communities and connecting with girls in other countries. And we're hoping that it will sort of spark that next generation of women in this country who maybe are heads of nonprofits or in government, but maybe they're heads of major, corporations, but they understand their place in the world and the role of women and the emerging trends in leadership. So that's sort of 2 potential ways to get involved as an American woman.
After this speech today, Alyse has got to go to Club de Madrid, so she will be participating in that, which begins shortly. But before she does, before we let her leave here, we have the opportunity for her to sign copies of Vital Voices, The Power of Women Leading Change Around the World. What a great holiday gift to daughters and mothers and aunts. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Alyse Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Sure. If I could just say one more thing, although I know I have to go. But Skip, I wanted to thank you and to thank you for this very warm welcome. I so enjoyed meeting with some of the students here. And I really hope that we can develop a meaningful partnership. Because I think one of the things that I have learned is that another one of our greatest untapped resources is young people. Because often they have the biggest, boldest, most innovative, crazy ideas that actually work. And we need to value them and listen to them and take them out for a spin. So I hope that we can find ways to further collaborate, and of course with the great partnership of Mac McClarty, who has been a constant, loyal male ally in the Vital Voices journey over 17 years. We need more like him.